The Texans have pulled off the perfect rebuild. Just a few years ago, they had one of the worst long-term outlooks of any team in the NFL, but they hit on a quarterback, and Nick Caserio has rebuilt the rest of this roster to the point that they're ready to compete for a Super Bowl. In this video, we're going to break down the Texans roster, looking at every player, every position group, and how they compare to the rest of the league. I'll be showing these roster graphics throughout the video. If you're new to this series, I've rated every player in the NFL based on this scale. I normalize all the ratings into scores for each position group and combine them into offense, defense, and overall scores by this weighting table. And I have the Texans ranked as the 10th best team in the NFL, 5th best offense, and 20th best defense. And starting at quarterback, I have CJ Stroud ranked as the 9th best quarterback in the league, coming off of one of the best rookie seasons in recent memory. I feel pretty confident that he has a floor of a top 10 to 12 quarterback and has the upside to be in the top 3 to 5. What was most impressive about his rookie season was the off-platform, out-of-structure playmaking that he flashed in the Georgia game but didn't show consistently throughout his college career. He answered all of those questions and showed that he can create when the play breaks down and be one of the best quarterbacks under pressure. The interesting thing about CJ Stroud, though, is that he's thought of as being this quarterback with just surgical accuracy and ball placement. We didn't really see that as a rookie. He ranked 27th in the NFL with a 71.8% on-target rate. He has the arm talent and control of ball placement to make some really difficult tight window throws that a lot of quarterbacks aren't capable of, but the down-to-down accuracy I actually think is an area he could improve in year 2, but I actually have more of a glass half full outlook on that. I look at it and say he was already a great quarterback, and the area that's supposed to be his biggest strength is an area that he needs to improve. We see all the time quarterbacks take a big jump in accuracy from year 1 to year 2, so it's understandable, and his entire college career he was one of the most accurate quarterbacks that I've ever evaluated, but I think it's pretty indisputable that he missed some relatively easy throws last season, so if he can start converting those, there's a clear path for him to increase his production. The Texans' biggest weakness offensively is running back and really the run game as a whole, which is not ideal because we know Bobby Slowick's going to stick to the run game regardless of how effective it is. Last year, Houston ranked 29th in the NFL in overall run game effectiveness, 29th in yards per play, 30th in explosive play rate. I think it's Slowick's biggest Achilles heel as a coordinator and the Texans' biggest Achilles heel as a roster. They signed Joe Mixon, who is fine, but coming off of a career low in yards after contact per attempt since his rookie year. He's a smart and tough runner, good vision, still has the ability to power through tackles at the second level. He's really just lacking juice and big playability at this point in his career. I think he's a slight downgrade to Devin Singletary, and if I had one criticism of the Texans offseason, it's that they didn't add someone in the draft or through free agency that was a little bit better than Joe Mixon. And I've got Dameon Pierce at RB2, really just for old time's sake at this point. I think there's a good chance he doesn't end up making the roster. I'm recording this Sunday morning right after their final preseason game. It wouldn't surprise me if by the time I'm editing this video, he gets cut from the roster, but I still think the Dameon Pierce fall off is worth getting into a little bit. So they took him in the 4th round in 2022. His rookie season was outstanding. He had a 24.8 force miss tackle rate, which was 99th percentile for all running backs since 2006. And as somebody that really liked his college tape at Florida, I expected him to be the Texans running back of the future. But in 2023, he had one of the worst running back seasons of all time, 2.8 yards per carry. He looked like a shell of what he once was, and by week 8, he had been fully replaced by Devin Singletary. And I think there's 3 things that led to this fall off. The first one is that the Texans switched to an outside zone scheme, which is just not a fit for Dameon Pierce. He's clearly uncomfortable reading outside zone, way too indecisive, doesn't press the line, doesn't identify cutback lanes. For his entire NFL career, you can see the split between gap and outside zone runs. He's averaging almost 2 yards less on outside zone, almost a 20% lower success rate. And then this plot has outside zone success rate on the y-axis and power counter success rate on the x-axis. Each point is an individual player season, and you can see at the very bottom we've got Dameon Pierce 2023 with a 9.8% success rate on outside zone. That's over 10% lower than the next lowest since 2015. He's just not a fit for this scheme, and I think regardless of all the other external factors, he was never going to have success in Bobby Slowick's offense. The second element to his fall off is that he was clearly a less dynamic and elusive running back in 2023 than he was as a rookie. I know he had a season-ending ankle injury at the the end of his rookie season. I don't know if that's fully what caused it, but his first year, he was a guarantee to make the first tackle miss. He was trucking 3-4 defenders in one play. In 2023, when he would get some open space, he was just a lot less of a playmaker. And then the final thing is that he got terrible blocking. I know Devin Singletary was a lot more effective with the same offensive line, but it was different with Dameon Pierce. The way I studied the Texans running game for this video is I watched all of Devin Singletary's carries, and then I watched all of Dameon Pierce's carries. And after watching Dameon Pierce, it was clear he just got straight up worse run blocking than Devin Singletary did. That's not to excuse him from all of the blame. The 2.8 yards per carry I think was a team effort, but there were plenty of plays where he had no chance, and regardless of who the running back was, it was going for a loss of yards. So hopefully Pierce can find success in a new scheme. I don't think it's going to be with the Texans, but when he's at full strength, he's one of the most entertaining running backs to watch in the entire league. And then the other running backs are Dare Ogunbowale, Cam Akers, and JJ Taylor. They also took Jawar Jordan in the 6th round. I wasn't a huge fan of his college tape, but the pass catchers are about as good as it gets across the NFL. I have them with the 5th best receiver room in the NFL, and that's led by Nico Collins, who is probably the best take that I've ever had since I've been doing football analysis. If you go and watch my Nico Collins video from last summer, I pretty much called the breakout exactly the way that it happened. I wish all of my other takes aged that well, but I will give myself credit for that one. And for that reason, I don't really see much of a chance that this is just a one-year fluke, because I felt like he put out really good tape in 2022. He just didn't have a quarterback that could reward him for that. He definitely took another step last year, but I think he's always been a good route runner. He's always had some of the most reliable hands in the NFL. Last year, he had an 82.5% success rate against press coverage, which was 2nd highest in the NFL. He has extremely reliable hands. He's great after the catch, 22 forced missed tackles last year after 4 in his first 2 seasons. Once you get past the top tier of guys like Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, I think Nico Collins is right in that conversation. And it might be a bit premature, but I honestly think Tank Dell is one of the best route runners in the NFL already. His movement skills and change of direction ability, the efficiency in and out of breaks, I think stacks up with anyone. Running those 7 stops and deep comebacks, he can just sink his hips and create separation as effectively as anyone in the NFL. Health and durability is a concern, and he's had some drop issues dating back to his time at Houston, but outside of that, I think he's one of the best wide receiver 2s in the league. And then Stephon Diggs is a player that I was a bit lower on watching his tape throughout the season, but studying him for this video and actually watching every single snap, I'm a lot more optimistic about what he can give the Texans offense. He had probably the 2 worst games that I've seen him play in the last few years against the Chiefs in week 14 and in the divisional round, and that was influencing a lot of my opinion on Stephon Diggs. But when you watch the rest of his games over the second half of the season, there's a clear explanation for his drop-off in production. Once Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator, Stephon Diggs was relegated to just being an afterthought in the Bills' passing offense. He was running such a shallow route tree, a lot of screens and hitches, not nearly as much stuff in the 10 to 20 yard range, which is where he really eats. So there were a lot more plays where he was just off the table as far as being a downfield passing threat. When he did get opportunities downfield, he and Josh Allen weren't able to connect. He had 3 open touchdowns on a deep post where Josh Allen overthrew him over the second half of the year. He was still able to separate consistently on stops and comebacks. That's where you saw most of his production later in the season. And in the first half of the year, he looked like the old Stephon Diggs. So I had him at like an 83 before I did an in-depth study. I raised him back up to an 86. I still think he's a high-quality wide receiver too. And between Collins, Dell, and Diggs, this is one of the best wide receiver trios in the NFL. But the Texans also have some great wide receiver depth. Noah Brown is one of the better wide receiver 4s in the league. He's injured right now, but I expect him to be ready around mid-season. John Mechie, I wasn't a huge fan of as a prospect. He hasn't been very impressive when he's played in the regular season. He's looked great in the preseason though, and there's a chance that he's finally getting healthy and could be ready to contribute in a backup role. And then Xavier Hutchinson was a 6th round pick last year who has a chance to make the roster. They've also got Ben Skoranek, who's more of a utility receiver, and I would say he's probably the other one that's in contention to make the roster. Overall, it's a high-powered receiving group, and I think this unit is appointment viewing tape every week. You've also got Dalton Schultz, who had a rough start to his Texans career, 3 drops in the first 5 weeks, but he ended up having a productive season and is great as basically the 4th option in this passing game. Tegan Quitoriano, who I'm probably mispronouncing, doesn't give you that much as a pass catcher, but he showed some flashes as a run blocker last year. They also took Cade Stover in the 4th round out of Ohio State. Extremely reliable hands, not a very fluid route runner in my opinion, but could develop into a safety blanket type of target. And there's also Brevin Jordan, who is not a high volume player, but averaged 16 yards per catch last year, had that big touchdown in the wild card game against Cleveland. Like receiver, they've got a good starter and also a lot of depth options. There's probably going to be one good tight end here that gets cut. The O-line is kind of emblematic of the rest of the offense as a whole. They're great in pass protection, not as good as run blockers. Laremy Tunsil is an elite left tackle, one of the best pass protectors in the NFL. From his hand usage, anchor, footwork, recovery ability, he's as good as it gets. He had the best individual performance against Myles Garrett of any left tackle last season. Garrett still got a couple pressures on him, but Tunsil made him look human. One of the key reasons they were able to win that game and dominate offensively. I remember I was doing a video on a Titans rookie left tackle, Jalen Duncan, and I was talking about how he needs to improve his set depth. When you're taking a 45-degree set as a left tackle, you want to stay pretty much parallel with the line of scrimmage for as long as possible. If the pass rusher counters inside, you want to be able to slide with them as easily as possible, and then if they attack the outside shoulder, you can open your hips and ride them up the arc. But if you open your hips too early and then they counter inside, then you've got to reflip your hips, and it's just a lot more difficult to mirror. And I wanted to show a teach tape example, so I just went to the most recent Texans game, clicked on the first passing play that I saw, and the first play I clicked on was perfect technique from Laremy Tunsil. So that just goes to show how all of his tape is teach tape. He isn't nearly as good in the run game. I would say his run blocking tape is uneventful, not a lot of wins, not a lot of losses. Pass pro is where he really thrives, and he's about as shut down as it gets. Their other tackle is Titus Howard, who had kind of a rough season in 2023. After playing most of his career at right tackle, they moved him to left guard last season, and I thought he really struggled in pass pro. He was not moving his feet well, struggled to anchor at times, not consistently forceful with his punch, but I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt with this rating. He's had 3.5 years of high quality tape at right tackle, at least as a pass blocker, and I think it's easy to just blame his struggles last season on injury and playing out of position. If you look at his Twitter account, he was clearly not a fan of the position change. His bio says right tackle only for the Houston Texans, but once again, he's a player that's much better as a pass blocker than he is in the run game. If given the option, I'll always take that archetype over the run blocker that can't pass block, but when you've got 4 or 5 of those guys across your offensive line, that kind of explains why the Texans weren't able to run the ball. And then Shaq Mason, I feel like, is easily the most underrated player on the Texans and one of the 5 most underrated players across the entire NFL. I think he's a top tier pass blocking guard. If I had to rank the guards in pass protection, I'd probably put Quentin Nelson, Tyler Smith, and Joe Tooney ahead of him at this point. But after that, I think it's between Shaq Mason, Zach Martin at this point in his career, and Landon Dickerson for the next best. He's the complete package as a pass blocker. He has outstanding hand usage, violent punch, but he can play with independent hands. He can replace his punch. He can counter different pass rushing moves. He has a rock solid anchor. He plays with textbook pad level. He has the short area slide quickness to mirror crossface moves and protect the edge. And then he's one of the smartest and most alert offensive linemen when it comes to picking up stunts and twists. The only non-Texans media person that I've ever heard even mention Shaq Mason is Brandon Thorne. No surprise, because he actually watches the tape. Outside of that, he's just like this anonymous guard that barely gets any recognition, but I think he's a Pro Bowl caliber player. He's also a pretty good gap scheme run blocker. I think he's the best run blocker on the Texans offensive line, more so than anyone they have. He can actually create movement off the line of scrimmage. He kind of balances that out though with, I think, too many losses in the run game, but he's the Texans' second best pass blocker, best run blocker, and a player that I think deserves a lot more recognition. The 2 questions on the offensive line are at left guard and center. At left guard, they've got Kenyon Green, who's kind of like John Mechie to me. I wasn't a big fan of him as a prospect. I haven't liked any of his NFL tape. His rookie year in 2022 was a disaster in my opinion. He missed all of last season with an injury, but then this preseason was really the first time I've been impressed at all by what he's put on tape. I've watched the tape from the first 3 preseason games. At the time I'm recording this, the Rams tape isn't out, so I don't know what happened in that game, but Hall of Fame game to week 2, Kenyon Green's tape has been pretty pretty much flawless. Obviously, I'm not going to have too many takeaways in the positive direction from a preseason game, but the hand usage and anchor has looked pretty solid with Kenyon Green. A lot of times it takes offensive linemen several years to put everything together, so hopefully Kenyon Green's figuring it out and can be a good player for the Texans offense. But based on what he's shown up to this point, I think he's a weakness at worst and a question mark at best. And Juice Scruggs was kind of a confusing second round pick last year. I didn't really see that based on his college tape, and I thought he struggled as a rookie. He was playing left guard, and this year he's going to move back to center, so hopefully the position change had something to do with it. But I thought he really struggled in basically every aspect of pass blocking. His anchor was really bad. You see on this play, he gets flattened by Justin Madubuike. Right here, Shelby Harris puts him on his back with a hesitation bull rush. His hand usage was also a major issue. He had a really difficult time dealing with cross chops. The first time I saw it was week 15 against the Titans. Danico Autry hits him with the cross chop. He jab steps inside. Scruggs punches with the outside hand. Autry chops across his body, knocks the hand down, gets into the pocket, and then once he put that on tape, basically every pass rusher that lined up across from him tried to hit him with that move. The next week against Cleveland, Za'Darius Smith beat him twice with the cross chop. Both of these reps, he's leaning, overextending, but not bringing his feet with him to seal off the B gap. Even on the second play, when Za'Darius Smith misses with the chop, he's still able to win the edge and get into the pocket. And then week 18, DeForest Buckner beats him with the cross chop and gets a sack on CJ Stroud. I've been charting a bunch of pass rushers this week, looking at all their pressures and charting each of them by pass rushing move. And this was actually the first time all season that DeForest Buckner got a pressure with the cross chop, so you clearly saw that on tape. He does have some upside as a run blocker. I think he's one of the better zone blockers that they have. He had a nice combo block in the playoffs against Laramie Tunzel, driving this 3-tech about 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. There's a chance that as he gets stronger, that becomes a true strength of his game, but I still am worried about the pass pro. When it comes to the depth, they've got Jarrett Patterson, who seems like he was a good find in the 6th round last year. He started 7 games for them last year, played at, I would say, a replacement level. Not a great athlete and probably not someone you want starting, but could fill in if you have an injury for a few games. They took Blake Fisher in the 2nd round, and I think it was a solid pick for the long term, but his preseason tape has been rough. I would not feel good about him playing as a rookie. Brian Burns had him in hell. He was hitting him with outside spins, inside counters, but even against the Steelers backups, the Bears backups, he was really struggling to hold up in pass pro. He had one good run block where he pancaked a safety, but I thought he also struggled in the run game. I'm not worried about him for the future, but right now he's more of a developmental player than a ready-to-go backup. They've also got Charlie Heck, who I would say is the 3rd tackle at this point, and Kendrick Green never put out good tape with the Steelers. I thought last year he had some nice moments. Very small sample size, but I'm at least intrigued about what he could be as guard depth. So overall, it's a very strong offensive line. I have them ranked 5th in the NFL. I don't have splits for pass blocking and run blocking, but I think they're much better in pass pro, and I think the passing offense as a whole is one of the best in the league, and the running game is firmly below average. Moving on to the defense, which ranks 20th, I think there's a lot to be excited about with this unit, but still probably a year away from reaching their full potential. The clear strength of this defense, though, is edge rusher, which ranks 6th in the NFL, and at this point, I would say they're led by Danielle Hunter, who they signed in free agency. I mentioned the charting I did for pass rushing moves. I'm working on a full video on that, but I ended up charting every pressure from 34 edge rushers, and then I calculated a moveset diversity score, which is basically how versatile are you as far as different pass rushing moves that you can use. And Danielle Hunter graded out as the 4th most versatile pass rusher by that metric. He can win with speed, power, inside counters. He had the highest long arm rate of any edge rusher that I sampled. He uses a spin move. He'll win with swipes and chops. He has so many different ways of attacking blockers, and he plays with relentless effort. And then you combine that with him being an elite athlete with extremely long arms. He's such a difficult player to block. So I love the Danielle Hunter signing. I think it's a great way to take advantage of the rookie quarterback contract window that they're in. With the edge duo of Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., somebody's going to have a one-on-one pretty much at all times, and it's going to be a headache for offenses. And then Will Anderson Jr. is a really interesting player to talk about. I did a full breakdown on him earlier this summer if you want to check that out. He had a very productive rookie season, deservedly won Defensive Rookie of the Year. His run defense was outstanding. I think he was one of the key reasons the Texans were so effective defending the run. They ranked 2nd in yards per play, 1st in success rate, 6th in EPA per play, 2nd in TFL rate. He pretty much never gets moved out of his gap. He's an excellent block shedder. He can set the edge, and if you try to run away from him, he's chasing down outside runs at as high of a rate as anyone. And as a pass rusher, like, it's hard to sit here and complain about what he did as a rookie. 68% 28 pressures and 8 sacks. He has a solid bull rush. He's really good with inside counters. I love his motor and pursuit getting after the quarterback. But to take that next step and be more than just a high-end number 2 rusher, he needs to add some pass rushing moves and get a lot better with his hands. He didn't really have much of a strategy last year for defeating the outside hand and clearing a path around the corner. He needs to add a double swipe or a cross chop, some go-to method of threatening as a high side rusher. And if he can do that, I think there's absolutely a chance that he emerges as a true number 1. I usually don't really buy into off-season weight transformation reports. You know, everybody's in the best shape of their life right now, but I am really interested to see Will Anderson this year. He's reportedly up to 265 pounds. He was listed at 245 last year. He already had a more effective bull rush last year than you would expect for a 245-pound edge. If he's playing in the 260s, he might be one of the better power rushers in the entire NFL. And if he can just be an unblockable battering ram, it might not matter how good he is with his hands. And keep in mind, even though it might seem like I'm being overly critical of him, he's already proven to me that he's a high-quality starter at least and worth the draft capital that they gave up to get him. We're talking about him reaching his ceiling and being an all-pro caliber player. There's still some things he needs to improve as a pass rusher to get there. They've also got Danico Autry, who's going to be suspended for the first 6 games of the season. I don't really have a way to capture that with the ratings, so you're just going to have to adjust for that in your head. And the first thing I have to say with Danico Autry is he's an edge rusher. There's a lot of people that talk about him like he's a defensive tackle. The Texans might end up playing him there, but that would be a development. That's not the position that he's played for the last 3 or 4 years. The Titans lined him up some at 3 technique on obvious pass rushing downs where there's no threat of the offense running the ball. Last year, for example, 48 out of his 767 snaps came at 3 technique, but he's not like an early down 3 tech that you're going to line up over the guard on first down and trust him to defend the run. He lines up inside on pass rushing downs because his quickness advantage over guards just gives them the best matchup. With the Texans' biggest weakness being defensive tackle, Autry's not a player that I think can just step into that role once he comes back from suspension. But as an edge defensive end, he's a really good number 3 rusher. He has good length, quick hands. He's got a devastating long arm, really good cross chop and swipe into the arm over. I felt like he took a slight step back last season compared to what he had been the previous 2 or 3 years. Still really good as your 3rd best pass rusher, but could be on the downswing of his career. They've also got Derek Barnett, who had kind of a career resurgence last year once he joined the Texans. I think he's great as your 4th best pass rusher, but it is important when we evaluate players to take note of level of competition. If you watch his pressures and sacks from last season, they pretty much all came against practice squad level tackles. In 8 games with the Texans, he had 22 pressures and 4 sacks. 9 pressures and 3 sacks came against Jalen Duncan for the Titans, who set the NFL record for sack rate and pressure rate allowed. He had 10 pressures and a sack against the Browns backup tackles. There's some bad offensive linemen in the NFL, so he's going to get some similar opportunities, but I don't think he's had quite the breakout that his stats might indicate. But overall, this is a phenomenal group of edge rushers. I also liked Solomon Beard as a prospect, who they got in the 7th round out of USC. He had some awful testing that didn't really match up with the tape, but I just thought he was so violent with his hands, and in a couple years, he could carve out a role potentially. But the interior defensive line is the real weakness of this team. I have them 30th in the NFL. I do really like Fadakasi, at least as a run defender. He has powerful hands, a good anchor, really impressive ability to flow with outside runs, but then sink his hips and stop his momentum to mirror a cutback. As a run defending 3 tech that can play some nose, be a good block shedder, I'm a big fan of what he gives you. Not really an impactful pass rusher, but I think solid on early downs. And then Mario Edwards is kind of the opposite player. Undersized 3 tech that I think should be a solid pass rusher. He's a good pocket pusher. He's got some swipes and chops. Had a nice club swim here against Tyler Biadasz. And then he got a sack on Peter Skoronski with a hesitation bull rush. Again, going back to the level of competition though, 8 of his 22 pressures last year came against the Panthers, who had one of the 2 worst interior offensive lines in the NFL. If he's your 3rd or 4th defensive tackle, I think he can be a great part of a rotation, but I don't love it if you're relying on him to start. They also brought in Tim Settle, who I really liked early in his career at Washington. Watching his tape last year though, I was really disappointed in his run defense. His game against the Bucs in week 8 might be one of the worst individual run defense performances that I've ever seen for a defensive tackle. He had 10 run defense snaps and got put on his back 7 times, but the rest of his tape didn't get much better. He has really poor balance. He gets flattened by combo blocks. Those short reach blocks, he just gets sealed off with no resistance and gets moved out of his gap really easily. He had a few flat flashes rushing the passer. He's kind of quick, but he's not going to get you more than 14 or 15 pressures for the entire season. They've got Khalil Davis as a backup 3-tech. He played a lot of snaps for them last season. He had some flashes rushing the passer, a really nice double swipe here against the Saints, and then got some wins against Peter Skoronski. But I also saw him get moved back a lot in the run game, and the pass rushing wasn't there consistently enough to rely on him as a starter. So the interior D-line is the main thing holding this unit back. Linebacker ranks 19th, but I actually think they could finish a bit higher than this. They signed Azeez Al-Shaair, who's a very solid starting caliber linebacker. He's a good run defender. He's fast, quick processor, rarely gets manipulated by misdirection. Not a great block shedder, but he usually reads the play quickly enough to stay ahead of blocks, and you didn't see that show up as an issue very often at Tennessee. In coverage, he definitely has the range to defend screens or run the pull in Tampa 2. He's just really lacking awareness in zone coverage of routes that are developing behind him. He's the definition of a spot dropper. He's going to get 8 yards of depth, go to a spot, and defend that 4x4 patch of grass. The zone coverage awareness and route recognition is by far the biggest weakness to his game, but other than that, I think he's a really solid player. And then Christian Harris, I think, is a huge X factor. He has superstar potential in my opinion, still needs to put it all together. His rookie year was rough. He had the lowest PFF defense grade for a linebacker since 2006 at 28.3. He struggled in both phases and looked like just an unplayable linebacker, but last year he took a major step forward in every area, and if he has a similar jump this year, he could be a Pro Bowl caliber linebacker. So he has the speed and length to be a premier cover linebacker, and you saw flashes of what he could be in that phase in really every element of pass coverage. He had the pick 6 on the stick route in the wild card game. Shout out to D'Amico Ryans for basically telling him where to go. But there was a similar play a couple weeks earlier against the Titans where he read this option route from Chigakonkwo, made a nice break on the pass, and got his hands in there to force the incompletion. This rep against the Panthers, you see how valuable his length is when it comes to being disruptive at the catch point. He did a good job running with David Njoku down the seam here and getting a pass breakup in week 16. And then throughout the season, you saw his ability crashing downhill, defending screen passes and underneath checkdowns. His coverage highlights from last season, I think, stack up with most linebackers across the league, and there's a ton of potential in that phase. He still has a ways to go with processing and play recognition. Right here, the Broncos run a play action bootleg. He doesn't see Marvin Mims coming across the formation, leaves him uncovered. Same thing here against the Jags. He doesn't pick up this shallow cross from Evan Ingram and gives up a big gain. And then right here, he's late to identify this flat route from Breece Hall, leaves it completely uncovered. And then as a run defender, he's just got to start reading the game more quickly. He's got to try to fill out some and get a little bit bigger to engage with blocks. And the tackling I thought was improved from his rookie year, but still I would say is a weakness at this point. He's listed at 226 pounds, and you see when he tries to square up with a block, he gets moved back pretty much at will. He's got the length and I think the violent hands to be a good block shedder if he gets stronger, but he just can't really hold his ground if a blocker secures contact. That causes him to get moved out of gaps or have to undercut blocks to try to avoid having to engage with them. He's also kind of stiff breaking down an open space. There's a lot of missed tackles on his tape from both seasons in the NFL, but there were at least flashes last year. I thought, like his pass coverage, there were real signs of improvement. This play, he does a good job of wiping through the puller, clearing an opening to the inside and making the tackle. You can see how violent he is with his hands. There's at least potential for him as a block shedder. Good job defeating this block from Aaron Brewer before he can establish contact. Right here, he's aggressive attacking this center as he climbs to the second level. And then good job here against the Colts out in the alley of establishing first contact on Mo Alley Cox. He sheds the block and forces the ball carrier out of bounds. And then when he does make the tackle, it looks great. He's a really physical tackler, hard hitter, kind of like in coverage. His tackling highlight reel is really impressive. He's just got to cut down on the misses. And then Henry To'oTo'o is a good third linebacker, played a lot early in the season last year. He made a lot of tackles. I just think there's real size and athleticism limitations. He struggles to get off of blocks, misses a lot of tackles, takes really poor angles to the ball, and he also had some rough moments in coverage. The cornerback room ranks 14th, and I think this really all depends on what Kamari Lassiter does as a rookie, but we'll start by talking about Derek Stingley Jr., who had a breakout season last year, 5 interceptions and 6 pass breakups on really just a half season's worth of playing time. He's already proven, I think, to have some of the best ball skills of any corner in the NFL. He does a great job attacking the ball from off zone coverage, but I think what's even more impressive is his ability to locate the ball and press man down the sideline. That's what really stuck out as his special trait in college, and that's translated to the NFL. I still think he has some room for improvement as a cover corner. You know, he did allow 5 touchdowns last year. There are sometimes his feet can kind of get tangled up in off coverage. I do like him a little bit more in press man, but playing him in off quarters, that's where you're really going to get more opportunities for him to play the ball and get interceptions, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. I have him ranked as the 9th best corner in the NFL. Really the only thing that's holding him back is just sample size. We've seen about half a season of this level of play. If he repeats that in 2024, I think he should absolutely be in that top tier conversation. And then Kamari Lassiter, I expect to be their other starter on the outside. He's gotten pretty much universally positive reviews this offseason. I really liked him as a prospect. The speed was pretty much my one hang-up, and it's not just the 40 time. You saw on tape he had some difficulties keeping up with receivers down the field, but his toughness and physicality and just skill at every other aspect of playing corner, I think, is enough to overcome that. I've just got to see it happen on tape in the NFL before I give him a higher rating than a 75. And then watching Houston's tape last year, I was surprised at how good Desmond King still is as a slot corner. There are limitations when it comes to downfield coverage. They used him mostly as an underneath zone player, but he's so reliable when it comes to limiting checkdowns to 1 to 2 yards instead of 7 to 8 yards. He's a great run defender, good at the catch point, did have 6 penalties last year, and that's been a problem for most of his career. He's not the flashiest player, but I think just a reliable starting caliber nickel, especially in a zone heavy scheme. They signed Jeff Okudah as some outside cornerback depth. He had some moments, especially early last season, but has just not developed into a good corner. He's really physical at the line of scrimmage. I think purely as a press corner, you know, the first 3 yards of the route, he's pretty solid. He's just lacking the athleticism to recover when he gets out of position, which is going to happen in press man. With all of his injuries, I just don't think he has the speed or quickness to survive with his play style. And he was awful last year in zone coverage, consistently letting routes behind him in zone. A lot of coverage busts, a lot of easily avoidable big plays that he gave up. There are worse cornerback fours for sure, but not someone you want to rely on as a starter. And safety is pretty average, but like linebacker, there are avenues for them to outperform this rating. Jimmy Ward is kind of the known quantity here. He's a great downhill player. He's really good at defending screen passes, underneath routes. He can break on stuff over the middle as the backside poach or robber safety in quarters coverage. Pretty much every bad rep from last season came down to a lack of speed. He gave up a big catch to Chris Olave where they had him in press man in the slot. He got beat down the seam by Tyler Conklin. He got outrun by Amari Cooper in the playoffs. You've got to keep him out of some compromising situations, and there are athletic limitations, but still a solid starting caliber safety. And Jalen Petrie had a really disappointing second year. I'm hoping he can bounce back because I really liked his tape at Baylor, and he was outstanding as a rookie. You can go watch the Jalen Petrie video I did last summer and just see what he was able to do playing routes over the middle of the field. Last year, he didn't have an interception after having 5 as a rookie, but it's not just that. He was way too much of a gambler. He gave up a lot of big plays, and his stat line could have looked a lot worse. If you rewind to the Derek Stingley section, count how many of his best plays are cleaning up for a Jalen Petrie mistake. I still think he has a lot of potential. I'm not completely out on Jalen Petrie, but we need a bounce back season in 2024. And Kalen Bullock, the rookie, he's a total boom bust type of safety prospect, elite movement skills and coverage range. He looked like a cornerback moving around the field at USC. He had 9 interceptions, 15 pass breakups in his college career, really good ball skills. He just has terrible eye discipline and zone coverage, also gave up 9 touchdowns at USC, and he's really skinny, so I worry about him as a box safety, having to play off of blocks and defend the run. It would surprise me if he was an impact as a rookie, but I think down the line he has a lot of upside to potentially take over for Jimmy Ward. So that's going to do it for the roster preview. The biggest strengths are quarterback, receiver, offensive line, at least as pass blockers, and edge rusher. Biggest weaknesses are the running game, interior defensive line, and then I would say cornerback depth. But the Texans have a golden opportunity here with a potentially elite quarterback on a rookie contract, Hall of Fame left tackle in his prime, an elite trio of receivers, and a ton of star power on defense. They should absolutely be considered Super Bowl contenders this year, even if there are some holes they need to fill in the next couple off seasons.